Okay, hey, welcome to another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. Today, I have a really cool review from the brand Grand Seiko. A little about them. Seiko was actually founded back in 1881. They're Japanese in origin and have factories throughout Asia. They cover all market segments from entry level to high end, and this is an example of their high end division, Grand Seiko, which was founded back in 1960 and is all made Japanese in house. Now, in terms of the type of watch, I'd consider this an everyday dress watch. Some key common characteristics and design, when you're looking for something that you can wear every day that still dresses up pretty nicely, you're going to want, of course, a clean, classic aesthetic, almost minimalist in design, and of course something that is sensibly sized. Now, this is the Grand Seiko SBGK005, and it's actually a 1,500 piece limited edition from their Elegance collection, featuring their signature Mount Iwate pattern. And this dial is actually done in blue with a simple yet balanced asymmetrical layout, featuring a small second subdial at 9 o'clock and a power reserve indicator at the 3 o'clock. These originally went for $7,400 retail before being sold out, but now you can get this particular model from Belmont Watches for $6,500. So I think that's quite a deal. This thing is just amazing and probably one of the most beautiful dials I've ever had on the channel or even experienced in person. So with all of that said, let's go ahead, zoom the camera out, get this piece in hand, and take a closer look. Okay, guys, another big shout out to Belmont Watches for lending this piece in. It is just glorious, guys. And I know I'm not the first YouTube personality to share this particular model, this dial, or this model in general, but man, does it just work. This is just such a fantastic piece. It's so beautiful. It just takes on so many tones and shades there. I just can't get enough of it. This is gorgeous. And of course, under the studio lighting, you're probably going to notice more of those, daily nicks and marks there. But this thing is really still in immaculate condition. And I tell you what, when it's on your wrist out in the sunlight, you really won't notice anything in terms of wear, because you're just going to be so captivated by this breathtaking dial here. I might even have to break out into some macro shots. It's really that good. So with that said, actually, let's go ahead and do that. Okay, guys, check that out. I mean, absolute precision, artistry, perfection. I mean, it just, the word comes to mind. There aren't a lot of other ways to describe something finished to this level, with this level of hand finishing, artistry. Just wow. Absolute craftsmanship, guys. Even the little cap there on that running seconds hand, beautifully beveled. Whew, what a stunner. Let's flip it over. Let's see what the back side looks like. You can see that nice little, some people might hate it, but look at that when the light hits that blue lion crest. Very different. Again, it's not something the Swiss would do, of course, but it's something Grand Seiko does, and they do it well. It just adds levels and layers. You can see, of course, the gold fill on that finishing. Ooh, this is just gorgeous. The Tokyo striping, right? Because you don't want to call it Geneva striping. Just really immaculate, guys. Can't stress that enough. So now that we have all that fawning out of the way, when you look at this, let's also check out the finish transition. Look at that. My goodness, that is sharp. Visually, not to the touch, but visually extremely sharp, so well defined. Just beautiful. One more look at the dial now before we get into kind of back into your regularly scheduled programming, but I just had to do that. So with that said, let's actually jump back. All right, so we're back. Now, some basics in terms of the dimensions. 39 millimeters in diameter across 12 millimeters thick, and that's including that beautiful sapphire crystal. It's only 43.8 millimeters lug to lug, which means this is going to wear extremely well, beautifully centered on the wrist. Some of you might have already noticed that this is not on the factory strap, and I think of that kind of like staging a home, right? It's nice to put the furniture in there so you can see how you would use it. Yes, it does come with the original strap from the good old folks at Belmont Watches. Beautifully done. This is just, it's been worn, and it's, you know, it has its wear marks, but it still works functionally. It holds it onto your wrist. It is a very fine, you know, crocodile strap with a great lining, midnight blue with a navy stitch. I mean, it's an impressive strap, but it's been worn, and it looks quite worn. I think in reality, whoever purchases this is probably going to wear it on something else. And for me, I would put it on this beautiful 19 millimeter Deluxe light gray nubuck slim strap. These go for about 95 bucks, and you can see the size range there. It even has it there, 75 millimeters on that end, 125 on this end in terms of the length. Really beautifully constructed. It has the quick release spring bars, which work for a dress watch, right? You don't have to worry about it the same way you would for maybe a tool watch that might have those bigger drilled lugs. Now, this thing is just gorgeous, and yeah, I just, there's not a lot to say about it. There's just a whole lot to just breathe in and take in, but I'll do my best to kind of share some of those other points here. So it does have a dual curved sapphire with an inner AR coating, so when you do have it at harsh angles, it's still going to be very legible, except for, of course, on the outer ends of that crystal, where you're going to get a bit of distortion, but you can see still quite legible ultimately. And of course, this is reflecting off of a black camera lens in a dark room, apart from two lighting sources in the studio here. So in real life, it's going to be a lot more well lit, and it's going to be a lot more vibrant, as well as a higher contrast, because now every one of these polished surfaces is going to appear visually a bit more white in the light, versus right now, again, they're reflecting off of dark surfaces and off of a dark background. Now, the crown is beautifully done. This is not a screw down crown, but it is because this is a manually wound movement, but it is signed and, you know, beautifully executed. I think it's the right size. I love this shape. It's very squat. It almost reminds me of something like the mini turtle, where it just has that really short lug to lug, so it stays beautifully centered on your wrist. Even with this slightly more expansive dial, I will say this watch wears and visually appears much smaller and just feels like a true dress watch from that perspective, but you are getting enough dial real estate there because of the scale to where you can have a beautiful layout like this and just appreciate all of the artistry that went into just the production and finishing of this dial. Now, the movement in here is going to be manual winding GS caliber 9S63. So it's one of their newer, more modern calibers, and it does have a +5 to -3 seconds per day accuracy, and of course it's typically going to be running much better than that. This is just a loaner, so I haven't really been checking on the timekeeping. My own personal Grand Seikos, you know, they run impeccably well. Even my normal Seikos with 6-hour movements, which everyone hates, typically run really well, at least you know, out of the batches that I have. Now, this does also have a 72-hour power reserve, so 3 days, which is great, and you can see that kind of broken down on the power reserve indicator there, which some people won't love, but I think it's the beauty within the asymmetry. This is not meant to be a watch for everyone. This is not a generic watch. This is not, you can't replace this watch with a Timex, right? This is something, it's a work of art. The asymmetry is part of it, even the asymmetry within the hands, where you have a much thicker hour hand and a more slender minute hand. There's just something about the offsets here that really set it off, which I See what I did there, which is really impressive. Also 48 AM of magnetic resistance, which is, you know, nice and kind of within, of course, the ISO to say that it has magnetic resistance. So hey, good enough there, but it's not, you know, some crazy engineer's watch that you'll be able to you know, take through you know, a machine in a hospital or something like that. Now, getting to the dial, you're getting, of course, applied indices that have been polished and faceted. This finely textured and domed dial, so it does have a slight dome to it, which you're probably going to see when you look at that minutes hand, which also does have a little bit of a curvature to it. And again, so that is in terms of visually, now you're going to get that exact accuracy to your eye, and everything is going to align just perfectly. So very, very cool. You're getting these Dauphine hands, of course, polished and then brushed on the top, and that just almost has like a tesseract like glow to them just because of how finely it's polished. And of course, you can just think back or rewind back to those earlier macro shots where you get to see really just how fantastically finished these are. But to the naked eye, extremely impressive still, which is nice. It's under macro, it's impressive. To the human eye, it's impressive. It is just again just a work of art. Now the lugs on here, 19 millimeters, as we kind of mentioned earlier. It does come with that crocodile leather strap, but you could have an option like this, and I think this kind of short nubuck here, not quite super fuzzy, but it does have a little bit of texture to it, ties in nicely. And then of course the gray, I think, makes it very, very versatile. So with that said, let's actually get this piece on the wrist and see how it wears. Okay guys, as you can see on my 7.5 inch wrist, this just wears beautifully. And I don't have a super wide wrist. I mean, 7.5 inches is on the larger side, but it's more of a round wrist. You can see it's quite beefy even at this angle. So even though I don't have a lot of real estate on top of my wrist, this just balances. It looks beautiful, especially with that extremely short lug to lug and those, you know, kind of more bowed and round, sumptuous features there. Of course, if I get it too close to the camera, you're going to get a bit of perspective distortion. So it's going to appear more oversized. And, you know, that's sometimes when people are taking wrist shots and stuff, it can look much bigger. But what I'll do is I'll leave my hand nice and low and just tighten up the frame so you guys can get a detailed look with just a bit of a truer aspect ratio of how this will appear on the wrist. And you can see it is well centered, very tidy, not anywhere near approaching oversized. And some of you might have been kind of scared away by that 39 millimeter diameter, especially when so many folks are going more back to vintage sizes, especially around the dress watch size, where 35s you know, are kind of coming back into style. I will say this is going to give you a lot more wrist presence than a 35 millimeter. Also, it's going to give you a more standard lug width, right? Even though 19 seems a bit large, I will say for me anyway, I like to keep it at 19 or above. I feel like 18, it just gets a little iffy, especially once you introduce a taper in terms of it looking a bit smaller on the wrist, right? It can end up looking a bit dainty or fragile here. This definitely, I categorize it as within that everyday wear space because of its size, because of its robustness. When you kind of look at that, no, it doesn't have a lot of water resistance. It's just listed as splash resistant, right? So not a lot here, but it definitely is a true dress watch within that respect. And again, of course, sized up, you know, modern and you know, accordingly. So this dial itself, like let's say you just went all dial on this and just kind of tapered everything else off, it would actually be a very traditional probably dial size if you were to slim down the bezel and the case. But for me, that's something, especially since it's a Grand Seiko with that Zaratsu polishing, it just adds something else to appreciate. And with that short lug to lug, it doesn't add too much visual weight. If anything, it just adds more visual interest. So really beautiful. But with that said, although there is no lume on this particular piece, what I'll do is I'll get it off the wrist and do some low light transition and get into my closing thoughts. Okay, let's go ahead and hit the lights here. Okay. Yes, again, as I mentioned before, There's no loom, but you're not always going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight. Sometimes you're going to be walking, you know, out and about, walking underneath overhangs, hanging out underneath the shade of a tree. So it is nice to see what these colors, textures, and finishes render like in less than optimal lighting, to maybe even include some high contrast lighting, which might expose any type of production defects. But here you're just gonna see, yeah, you know, a couple of wear marks there, those fine lines on that high polish, which do add a bit to the wabi-sabi of it all. And man, this is just gorgeous. Woo. Look at the way that this dial just lets the light dance off of it. You can see slight texturing and just different lengths too. Like some of it feels heavier, some of it feels very surface level. But also you're noticing that the indices and hands are so reflective. Even with minimal lighting, you can actually still get things quite legible and still stay quite oriented with just a sliver of light, which I think is very, very cool. Whew. And there is a braceleted model similar to this layout. This was actually, I believe, one of the first to use this particular case style. But if you look in the Elegance collection now, they actually do have quite a few variations. So this thing is just gorgeous. But with that said, let's get into it. Closing thoughts, guys. On the wrist, this wears just perfectly great for everyday wear while still working as a dedicated dress watch. Like, you could absolutely get suited and booted with this bad boy and just be dressed all the way up, right? I'm talking bow tie level, and this would be right at home. Of course, you might want to throw it on something a little shinier to go with your patent leather shoes, maybe some crocodile or lizard skin, whatever. So many options, especially when you think about the texture on the dial and all the play you can get. But for me, from an everyday standpoint, this can be dressed down very casually. And there was a time, of course, when most people's everyday watch was a dress watch because people generally dressed up a bit more. But do I think that this could still work with jeans and a t-shirt? I do. I absolutely do, especially with this blue dial. In terms of model variants, definitely check their Elegance collection online for current variations utilizing this case setup, and then comparable models. I think in terms of design execution level, this piece can absolutely hold its own with the very best luxury dress watches on the market, while putting many of them outside of precious metal pieces, I would say, to shame. Yeah, that's right. Like, you put this next to a watch that goes for 80 grand and it's a dress watch, you know, there's only so many things you can do to, you know, a basic kind of more time only style layout when it comes to that level of minimalism. And I feel like Grand Seiko's really found a way to translate that into something that you can appreciate with the naked eye as well as in macro level. Some of those super high-end hot horology pieces, when it comes to a basic dress watch, they're going to be more, you can appreciate them more, I would say, down to that macro level. But at regular, you know, eye to wrist distance, it's just going to look like a nice watch, right? It's going to be a well done watch. And of course, you're going to probably recognize the name a bit more. You might get a little bit more brand recognition from, you know, from the Holy Trinity of watches, at least on the Swiss side, of course. But I will say that even an average or even not average, you know, watch person, or even if they are just casually, just if they even can appreciate anything about a watch, they'll probably be able to appreciate mostly everything about this dial. They might not care about how it was done in the artistry and the storytelling behind it, the fact that it's meant to, you know, look similar to Mount Iwate from a bird's eye view or anything like that, but they're going to be able to see something that looks pretty, and they're going to be able to say, wow, that is very, very pretty to my eye. So for me, guys, bottom line, Grand Seiko have created something truly special here, worthy of being considered absolute luxury. Again, it's the asymmetry that's something that's so different. It's not going to be copied. You're not going to be able to have a really cheap variation of something that's going to make you recapture what you capture here. This is going to, when you look at it, for you to get something else like this that captures this level of just wow factor, you're going to be paying a lot more money, which is wild, right? Like, this is already, yes, an expensive watch. It's not cheap, but it does add so much value, especially at $6,500 from Belmont. So I mean, if I had $6,500, right, and even if I didn't even have a full 60, if I was close to having an extra $6,000 or $5,000 laying around, I tell you what, I would be trying to throw crazy bargains at these guys for this piece, because it is just immaculate. It's beautiful. The fact that it's limited, and you know that there's not going to be, you know, it's not like they're making more or a cheaper variation of it anytime soon. You know, it just gives it another level and layer of timelessness, to where it's like, all right, like, this is the one. If I want this one that gives me these feelings, there's this. And then there are, of course, some more regular production based variations, but there's something very, very special about this. So again, end rant and ramble, but if you did like this video, please do it like, and if you haven't already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.